The Quran identifies the geographic location of the interactions between Moses and Pharaoh with extreme specificity, leaving no room for doubt. In fact, the Quran mentions 5 descriptions in its narration of Moses and Pharaoh's story: the western side, Yam, Madyun, Torah, and the Tor. The western side, the first location identified by the Quran, is where Moses learned from God that the confrontation with Pharaoh and his army is over. He also learned the timing of his escape with the Israelites from the tyranny of the Pharaoh. This specific location is identified as the western side of Mecca because God said to Prophet Muhammad, "And you weren't, O Muhammad, by the western side as we handled the situation with Moses, and you weren't one of the witnesses." Prophet Muhammad lived in Mecca at the time, and the western side of Mecca is northern Sudan. If anything, this tells us that the story of Moses and Pharaoh took place in what we now know as northern Sudan, or to be precise.
By the way, it's worth noting here that back then there was not the land that is now called North Sudan. It was known as the Nubian Kingdom of Kush. Hence you can confidently say that Misr was in Egypt, Lower Misr, in addition to Kush, Upper Misr, until now the Abyssinian highlands.
Kush was the home of people of dark skin called the Kushites, who built a strong civilization economically, politically and spiritually. In fact, the people of Kush built around 300 pyramids compared to the 60 pyramids built in Lower Misr, Egypt. There were always disputes between Upper and Lower Misr about who would rule Misr as a whole, and indeed the Nubian Kush or Upper Misr succeeded sometimes in ruling Misr as a whole. Eventually, the Lower Misr, Egypt, succeeded afterwards to control the reign of Misr as a whole. And since the story of Moses and the Pharaoh took place in the current north of Sudan, or in a more accurate description, at the southern part of Misr before the border division took place in 1899. This then means that the story of Moses and the Pharaoh took place in the land of Kush, or in the Upper Misr region, and that the Pharaoh that was referred to in the Quran is a proper noun for one of the kings of Kush, or Upper Misr, that is currently north of Sudan, and not Ramses II, the king of Lower Misr, Egypt, as narrated in some history books. In the Quran, Pharaoh says, "Aren't I the ruler of Misr, and these rivers are running beneath me, can't you see?" If we refer here to Egypt, Lower Misr, as we know it today, it is only one river, the Nile. Nevertheless, the Quran is referring to Upper Misr, which has many rivers. This again implies that the story of Moses and Pharaoh took place in Upper Misr or northern Sudan. The river Al-Yam, the second location mentioned in Moses and Pharaoh's story, refers to where Pharaoh sunk with his army. Another reference to Al-Yam is where Moses' mother sent him afloat in a basket when God ordered her to do so to save him from the soldiers of the Pharaoh. At the beginning of Surat Taha, God says to Moses' mother, "And put him in the coffin and throw him in Al-Yam," referring her to the river. In the same chapter, towards the end of the story of Moses and Pharaoh, God says, "And the Pharaoh and his soldiers followed them, and they've seen from Al-Yam what they've seen." So while we agree that Moses at the beginning of the story was thrown in Al-Yam and the Pharaoh at the end of the story sunk in Al-Yam, we associate 2 meanings to Al-Yam. We claim that the first Al-Yam is the River Nile and contradict ourselves by saying that the second Al-Yam refers to the Red Sea, where the Pharaoh and his army supposedly met their fate. Wrong. Both instances refer to the river where Moses was left as a child and the place where the Pharaoh and his army sunk beneath the waters.
It's clear that Al-Yam in the Quran refers to the same location, which is the River Nile, specifically the part of the Nile in northern Sudan. In fact, the word yam linguistically means water as a source of life and food, and it was used to refer to the Nile Valley in this region, starting from the 4th cataract to the 6th cataract. This area, Yam, is one of the most fertile areas in the Nile Valley and is now called Shendi Branch, where the Nile starts to become wider and with lower fertile banks. Obviously, you're beginning to question here, what about the verses in Quran that explain Moses crossing the sea and the fatal ending of Pharaoh and his army beneath the waters? The Quran says, "And as we parted the sea, and we rescued you and sunk Pharaoh and his followers while you were wandering."
Let's address this. The Quran was revealed in Lesson Arabic, so they understand. Arabs use the word bahra for sea, or for any large body of water like oceans, seas, rivers, lakes, etc. For example, in Surat Al-Furqan, "And he who combined water from both seas, one is fresh and drinkable, and the other is salty and not drinkable, and made between them isthmus and carved rocks." Similarly, "And the 2 seas are not equal. This is fresh and drinkable, and this is salty and not drinkable." The Quran here is clearly referring to the sea as a big body of fresh or salty water, whether it's actually a river.
Let's continue with the story of Moses and the fourth location mentioned in the Quran in relation to his journey. After Moses settled and had a job and wife in Madian, he stayed there for a long time, but he was determined to go back to Miz.
As he was on his way to Miz with his family, he reached the valley of Torah, where God called him, "Verily I am thy Lord, therefore in my presence put off thy shoes, thou art in the sacred valley Torah." The sacred valley Torah is the location where Moses spoke to God. This valley is next to a very high and huge mountainous structure called the Torah. The Quran says, "And we called him from the right side of the Torah and made him draw near to us." This implies that the very high and huge mountainous structure called the Torah is in the same location of the sacred valley of Torah.
The question that comes to mind here is, where is this location? Where is the sacred valley of Torah, and in which country?
Let's check the map. If Moses is returning from his family from Madian, then clearly he would enter Miz from the south, which implies he would pass through Abyssinia and the eastern north of Sudan. Indeed, on the current borders of Sudan and Abyssinia, and specifically on the Abyssinian highlands, is a valley named Torah. You can find this information in the book of James Bruce, a Scottish explorer who was the first to follow the Blue Nile from its source until it meets the White Nile. On the 29th of November 1772, Bruce arrived in Aswan and published his book, Expeditions to Discover the Sources of the Nile between 1769 and 1773. It's considered one of the most authentic books that examine the River Nile Valley. About his trip from Ethiopia to Egypt, he mentioned a significant piece of information. He referred to a town called Al-Gadarif, a town at the border between northern Sudan and the Abyssinian highlands. Its true name was Torah. Bruce illustrates the map of Miz before the recent borders between the north and the south. On the map you can easily locate Torah next to Abyssinian Heights. From a geographical perspective, Torah, or the city of Al-Gadarif, is located in the Ethiopian hills at the border with Sudan. Rivers flow into this place and create fertile, rich soils that retain water and provide essential nutrients to plants. In fact, it's considered to be one of the top agricultural areas in Sudan, with high, fertile valleys around the rivers of Atbah, State, Al-Harad and Bislam, highly known for corn and sesame all around the world. As for the animal population in Al-Gadarif, around 7 million different types of cattle come from nearby neighbourhoods seeking water and food. God describes this area in the Quran as the blessed spot. The blessing refers to the diversity of the rivers, agricultural crops, trees and food, which applies to the city of Al-Gadarif. This area and Sudan in general is considered to be the food basket of the world. There is no other area as blessed agriculturally as this area in the entire Arabian and African region, just in terms of the number of rivers, the variety of agricultural harvests and the greenery.
So what is the story of the very high and huge mountainous structure called the Torah, or the Tower, the fifth location identified in the Quran? And we called him from the right side of the Torah and made him draw near to us. The Torah is a very high and huge mountainous structure and was mentioned in the Quran as the Torah Sina or Sinai, the Torah Sanin, and just as the Torah.
It's recorded in Arabic dictionaries and scholars of the science of tafsir that Sinai and Sanin are known Abyssinian nouns. Indeed, if you check the map of the Abyssinian highlands, you will find names like Sanin, Semien, Sina, Senan. In fact, in the Abyssinian highlands you will find a mountain called Debre Sina, or Mount Sinai in English. The exact name of the mountain is also found in modern Egypt and is called Mount Sinai. You will also find in Abyssinian highlands Mount Sanin. And what's interesting is that in the Abyssinian highlands, despite the difference in the names, Sanin, Semien, Senan, Sina, etc., they all represent one mountainous structure, one range, one plateau, called the Tower Plateau. From a geological perspective, the Abyssinian highlands is considered to be one block, moulded since creation from one origin. This range is called the Abyssinian Tower, also referred to as the African Tower, because it is the biggest group of mountains with a height that extends in one chain in Africa for a very long distance, 519,278 kilometers squared. That's why Ethiopia is sometimes referred to as a tower. Even the highest peak in Africa, Mount Kilimanjaro, extends only to 4,000 kilometers squared. The Abyssinian Heights has been referred to as the African Plateau or the African Roof, with different heights exceeding 4,000 metres to a maximum of 4,500 metres. As for the Sinai or Sina mountain in modern Egypt, its average height is only 2,300 metres, and the area of Sinai altogether is 61,000 kilometres squared. Most importantly, the Sinai that you know today in modern Egypt was not called Sinai in the time of Moses and the Pharaoh. It was called Mafkat, which means the land of turquoise. Also, the so-called Mount of Tor in Sinai in modern Egypt was then called Retho. There is no single evidence of the usage of the name Senin or Sina for any of the mountains in the turquoise land that was later named Sinai or Sina. The Quran has to refer to known nouns with the real names as they were used at the time, and there is no mention of Mafkat or Retho in Moses' story. What was referred to in the story was the Tor Senin and the Tor Sina, which are known nouns from an Abyssinian origin, as documented in the authentic Arabic dictionaries and as illustrated by scholars of tafsir.
Let's get back to the terminology that describes the Abyssinian highlands as the Tower Heights. The word tower simply means the highest location from which you can see across the largest possible landscape around you. There's nothing as high and nothing as big as this spot in all of the Arabian and African region. To further simplify this, the word tower originally comes from Tor in Arabic. The word tower in French is tour, in Spanish it's torre, in Italian also torre, and in German it's Turm. It's clear they all come from the same word, the Arabic word Tor.
Of course, this is no coincidence, because if you look in the Oxford English Dictionary, you'll find that the origin of tower is Tor. It's also worth noting that there's another name for the Abyssinian highlands, that is, the water tower. This is because it is the water source of the River Nile Valley for all this region, south from Abyssinia, north and east from Sudan, and all the way to the Mediterranean. When God swears by the Tor, then he swears by the Abyssinian highlands, or the so-called water tower, the source of the water of the River Nile, referred to as al-Bahr al-Major, or the large body of water kept filled in Quran. Yes, the River Nile is al-Bahr al-Major, or the large body of water kept filled. Let me clarify this one too. What is the meaning of al-Bahr al-Major? It means the sea that gets full until it floods, and as we know, the flood is a main characteristic of the River Nile. To summarise these meanings and connections, the River Nile originates from the Abyssinian highlands, the water tower, the Tor. Each year there is a flood season, so the soil gets fed with silt. This natural flooding phenomena is what created the first civilization in history, the Nile Valley civilization. Without the flood, there is no agriculture and no civilization. Al-Bahr al-Major, as mentioned, refers to the sea that gets full and floods, thus referring to the River Nile.
As we answered before, the word al-Bahr in Arabic and in the Quran is used to refer to both river and sea. In a nutshell, the Tor is the source of al-Bahr al-Major, or the River Nile. At this point, you might also wonder, can there be a water stream that fit the definition of al-Bahr al-Major other than the River Nile? Well, what are the odds for a location that connects all the aforementioned dots, a location that meets the specific characteristics of the Tor Sinin, the Tor, the Valley of Tor, and al-Bahr al-Major, as referred to in the Quran, other than the Abyssinian Heights? To summarise, as Moses was returning to Misr from Midian, Yemen, God talked to him at Tor Valley, that is next to the Abyssinian highlands, the Tor, at the Sudanese-Abyssinian border, which is currently called Al-Gadarif, which was the southern part of Misr before the British colonisation.